Hello and welcome to TheatreVoice. I'm Ella Parry-Davies and I'm talking to Paul Mason, award-winning journalist and author of several books and seismic articles including Why It's Kicking Off Everywhere, which started life as a blog post in 2011 and expanded to become a book published in 2012, as well as The End of Capitalism Has Begun, a 2015 Guardian article that was followed hot on the heels by Post-Capitalism, A Guide to Our Future, a 2016 book published by Penguin. Why It's Kicking Off Everywhere was staged as a performance at the Young Vic in March, directed by David Lann, and a film of that live performance will be shown this Saturday, 22nd of July at 10 p.m. on BBC2. Paul, welcome to TheatreVoice.
Thanks for having me.
So perhaps we can start by talking a little bit about the story behind the book, behind the show, how you came to be reporting on the kind of events and pulling these things that are happening around the globe all together under this title, Kicking Off. Why is it all kicking off everywhere?
The blog started, the idea started, and in fact the show starts with a scene where I'm in an occupation in London in 2011, after the fall of the Tunisian dictator Ben Ali, but before the fall of Mubarak in Egypt. So at this critical moment in the Arab Spring, I just went to this occupation in London, and they asked me to do a lecture. So I'm doing the lecture, and I'm realizing that as I'm lecturing, they're texting each other, or in fact they're tweeting each other. They are communicating not just with each other, but with other protesters all over the world. And soon after that lecture, a couple of the people who I'd been speaking to just suddenly turn up tweeting from Egypt on a crucial day of the revolution there. And it made me want to answer the question, what is different about the way people are thinking, protesting, and formulating their aspirations because of social media? So the initial blog was called 20 Reasons Why It's Kicking Off Everywhere. And I wrote it very quickly up into a book because while this is all going on, I'm in Egypt. I'm in Greece as Greece explodes and they occupy the squares there. I went to New York while the Occupy Wall Street protest was on. So I tried to write all this up into a kind of instant book, and some of it has stood the test of time. And so with the show, 7 years on, 6-7 years on, we kind of now know where that all ended up. It ended up with, Donald Trump comes to power, Vladimir Putin is manipulating the American election, etc. And when I got the opportunity to turn the book into a play, what I wanted to do was to test its ideas against what had happened. And in the middle of the writing process, Trump happened. And so it became pretty clear what the end scene of the play would be.
Okay, great. And then how does that kind of map onto the timescale of the play? What were the decisions that you had to make in taking such a kind of a huge time span and kind of global span that you had in the book and transposing that into the space of a stage, and a very bare stage at that?
And not only that, I mean, it's a bare stage with a very sophisticated multimedia immersive environment around it, which gave us a lot to play with. And David Land commissioned it from me as a specific piece for a specific time with a specific kind of audience. And of course, it's to be on BBC television. It's part of their Performance Live series. And in other words, it's specific to that as well. So we had a lot of resource and we had a lot of certainty about how we would be able to deploy those theatrical resources. And it was really quite easy then to chunk. I mean, the hard part was to cut things out. It forced me to think, what is the essence of this book? And I said, we're going to tell the story in three places. One is Greece, one is Egypt, and another one is in the United States. And really, in the hour and 16 minutes it was on stage, and the hour it will be on TV, you just have time to go to those three places twice and see before and after and explore some critical human situations. It's fair to say that, I delivered a complete draft from 2011 through to Trump is inaugurated, but very little of, well, I'd say about half of that has survived the process of rehearsal and devising that then David Lan and the Young Vic team put me through. Of course, in this, I should say, I'm on stage for the entire time. I never leave the stage, and I am me. I narrate the play, but every line is scripted, and so I'm not kind of busking along as we go. I'm me, but I'm also a character, and that having sort of explored that on black and white paper, and thought I'd kind of got my head around it, the first day in rehearsal convinced me that I hadn't really got my head around it, and the rehearsal and devising process was yet another iteration of making that story into a human narrative in a four-walled space.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that devising process? Because I know that some of the performers you were working with were actually involved in the protests and riots that you were writing about.
Yeah, I mean, so Khalid Abdullah is and was an Egyptian activist. The two female members of the cast are both Arab, or in one case half Arab, and had experienced the whole thing. It wasn't so much that they were bringing their experience, although in some cases they brought more than their experience. They brought their archive of video. I mean, we were able to use so much of what the small acting team, the cast, could bring to that. But what they were helping me to do was to create temporary characters, because we decided that the only consistent character in this play is me, even though I'm not really a fictional character, and that everything else will be played, in theatrical terms, fairly shallow. That is, you're not going to build a character around a rioter who turns up for 20 seconds, and yet you have to. And the challenge for me was to help the cast and help the director sometimes to understand what my intention was in bringing out this specific verbatim speech. Because it's based on journalism, I decided that it had to be what they said. I wasn't going to rewrite the speeches to make them more literary or dramatic. It was what I went back to my sources and my notes and my original recordings and dug out the most relevant things that people said to me throughout this time. And that's quite a challenge for an actor, because it means that the author, the playwright, is not going to rewrite that speech. We have to find in it the dramatic meaning. And I kind of implicitly knew what I thought that was, and the devising process was in part about that, but it was also about staging, because one riot looks a lot like another, and we wanted some audience interaction. We wanted as much as we could get, in fact. And so pulling out what the inner dynamics of the scene was something that really, I have written another play, so I'm not a complete newbie on writing for the theatre. I've also written and contributed to screenplays. But really, this was a very challenging process, because it means digging out the story in a way you just don't do with, say, a finished screenplay, and then you just direct it and find the inner meanings. It was finding the inner meanings at a kind of more political and deeper level.
There are elements of audience participation in the show as well. Could you tell us a bit more about that? And maybe, what did theatre offer you that writing a book or speaking to a camera with an audience on the other side of a TV screen, what did theatre offer to you that those mediums didn't?
Well, the point about TV reporting, news reporting, is that the aim of it is to be as factual as possible, as accurate as possible, and in news terms, as quick as possible. The aim is not to impart meaning. In fact, the aim is the opposite. It's to try and reserve judgment about what the meaning is, because you can end up imposing meaning on a situation that is wrong. So that's what, as a journalist, my discipline is to do that. as a writer of journalistic reportage, which is what the book is, my aim is of course, to analyse and bring out political meaning. But the point about a play is it has to tell a story. And there's an interesting story. I mean, literally, there are... I don't think any character appears twice. So it's me, plus the people passing by me, some of which are composite characters, but a lot of which are real people I met. And we just have to try and work out what happened in a 6-year period of history from the stories they tell to us. And that's the difference, because the narrative are... I am a big fan of and practitioner of, in all my work, story structure. The narrative arc has to be convincing. It has to be real. It has to be clear. And so it was the biggest challenge was to say, come on, Paul, why out of these 3 scenes, these 3 pieces, these events, these 6 years, what story is told? And I think the story is fairly clearly told now about a networked form of protest, a completely new form of thinking and acting that runs in to a hierarchy that just does not want to give up power. And we see that happen with the American elite, flipping over to Trump at the last minute. We see that happen in Egypt, where they just cannot bear the idea of the people in control. And we see it in Greece, where there's a scene in the play where some people are really on the edge of staging a kind of 19th century style revolution in Greece, and they just can't bring themselves to do it. And as a result, what happens is just, the country is, demoralized, the political movements are destroyed. All of these things have happened in real time, in our lifetimes. And I wanted to try and give meaning to those events.
As you say, you're the only kind of constant figure on stage, or the only constant character, and it's also you who gets to decide what everywhere means, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, that's a big claim, and inevitably, the question comes about, what isn't in everywhere, what doesn't get made visible. Yeah. That's an inevitable question. So how have you kind of dealt with that? How have you approached it?
Look, there are a lot of places where it didn't kick off metaphorically. I mean, of course, everywhere is a rhetorical device. It was, Ireland, for example, went through a huge economic slump, huge indebtedness, real economic pain. Not much happened. I mean, left-wing political parties have got a few more seats in the Irish Parliament now, but not in 2011. Likewise, some parts of Europe, nothing happened. So clearly it wasn't everywhere. But it was in enough places for a lot of people in power to really start panicking, because they thought that by degrading and in some cases even destroying trade unions and socialist parties, that was the end of the resistance to capitalism. And by sort of the middle of 2011, it's fairly clear that something new is breaking out in quite a lot of places that looks very similar, and it's young people using network technologies, using their own individualism as a strength instead of a weakness, and formlessness as a strength rather than a weakness. That was the thing that struck me, and I wasn't the only person. PhDs have been written about this by now, 6 years later. So, yeah, I mean, if this was just a dramatization of the book, it would be a boring play. But it's a dramatization of what I say in the book, interrogated by me, because I, hopefully like all other educated people, try and keep my own ideas and analyses under constant review. And this sounds very technical, but what it means is things like, why did a movement that filled Tahrir Square in Cairo, in Egypt, in 2011, end up filling it 2 years later with effectively calling for a military coup to end the revolution? Why did things like that happen? So I'm the only person who experienced it all. And yes, I privilege myself in this play by putting myself on stage as the narrator. But the experience of making the play did teach me a lot about what it means to have that privileged voice. Because not only were people on stage with me who'd gone through those events for real, there's footage in the video wall from colleagues, acquaintances and friends that they've risked, life and limb to get hold of that footage, and I'm editing it. I hope we've created something innovative and new in terms of form, in terms of technique, but I would love to see other voices given the privilege of using that form and technique to tell their side of that story.
That's really interesting. Can we talk a little bit about technology? Because that's really the link that you draw between lots of these movements.
Yeah.
Is social media, and then going forward, you even kind of talk about that the implications of that medium for Trump's election. So a lot of emphasis is placed then on social media and digital technology.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you suggest about it is that it's very kind of horizontalizing, that it takes apart some of the hierarchies of the forms of politics that we might have been used to in the past. A question I had when watching the play really was, okay, but what about technology giants like Apple, Google, Twitter? How does that actually replace hierarchies with a different form of power rather than horizontalizing or kind of democratizing communication?
No, I mean, the paradox of the current situation is that we have the biggest monopolies we've ever had in corporate life. Apple, Google, Samsung, Alibaba in China, WeChat in China, huge monopolies on the scale not seen even 100 years ago when monopolies were big. Okay. On the other hand, what they are allowing us to use are network technologies that allow us to go around existing blockages and obstacles and power structures. That was the situation in 2011 for certain. And so even things like, something quite ordinary like Al Jazeera, which is a TV, it's not even a network, it's a TV station, allowed Egyptian people to see their own country in a way they'd never seen it before. And when the TV was switched off, they just switched over to the internet. When the internet was switched off, they went to the streets and told each other what was going on. And people said, oh, well, it's all students and it's all young people with their smartphones. One of the Egyptian revolutionaries, young woman I interviewed, basically said, look, even my illiterate doorman on my building is running up to me saying, you're the one who's caused all this. And she says, how do you know? And he says, because somebody sent the video to me on my phone. So, the technology was incredibly empowering. But, of course, it's provided to us by technology giants who they're sitting in a very difficult situation. I know, from both my reporting and through experience that the way repressive governments have dealt with these technology giants is to order them to obey. And if they don't obey, increasingly, governments are constructing ways to take control of the technology, whether they obey or not. So in Egypt, the Egyptian government in 2011 sent people into the internet service providers and told them to switch off Facebook. In Turkey, 2013, where I was, and which is depicted in the play, where there's a big riot there, one internet service provider told me, look, they didn't even have to come round to switch Facebook off. They switched it off by reaching into our system. Now, are these ISPs and big technology companies the friends of revolutionaries? No, I don't think they are. I think that part of the revolution has to be to take the technology out of their control. But in a way, we are facing two sets of powerful people: technology monopolies who need a relatively open system, and dictatorial, kleptocratic, i.e. mafia regimes that want to shut them down and us down. And in a way, this replays the kind of triangular power structure that existed in the 19th century between, in the 19th century, it was the working class, the bourgeoisie, i.e. the middle class and the factory owners, and then on top of that, the aristocracy. And sometimes it was two against one, and sometimes it was everyone against each other. And I think in the 21st century, we're going to see more and more struggles where people at the bottom, the ordinary person trying to change their life, has to work out whether it's possible to ally with the big tech people, or whether the big tech people are actually just acting as Big Brother on behalf of the state.
So at this kind of crossroads that you've set out here, between corporations, governments, people, and lots of other players that have got stakes in this, what does it mean to show this now? What does it mean to put this on TV in the UK in our current political situation? And what are you what's your aim, or what do you project in terms of what this will do for our public today?
I start the play by quoting Brecht. Brecht said in, I think it's the Novum Organum for the theatre. Anyway, Brecht said, look, in a time of crisis, the theatre has to be like a man who's seen a car crash and tries to describe what's happened to the passers-by. And sometimes Brecht says he has to act things out, and at other times he has to be very, very clinical and simply describe what happened. And I thought, that's what I've got to do. Actually, it's a quote from Street Scene by Brecht. And he was talking about the change that has to happen in the theatre when society-level events just demand that if you walk into a space with a row of bleachers and a stage, you can't not mention what's going on. Now, by the time this play took a lot of time to develop and went through several iterations, but by the time it was rushing towards the BBC and the Young Vic pressing go, yes, it's definitely happening, Trump came to power. And I said to David Land, this has got to be a response to Trump. There will be other responses to Trump, other plays will be written, but this one has to answer, why did it all go so well for so long, and then why did it go badly? And ultimately it answers because the elite that rules the world did work out a way of dealing with the fact that we now have communicative technology, that we can produce our own blogs. We don't have to read the Daily Mail and the Sun and the New York Post. We can tell each other the truth. And that what they worked out was the best thing to do was to attack the concept of truth. So what it means to put this play on now, it's not about, Theresa May and Corbyn and Grenfell and all the things that have gone on, in the recent period in Britain. Of course, people who view it will understand that it is in that context. But what it is about is about the need for people in power to attack the concept of truth. And we see that beginning in the play. Insofar as you can do anything in 1 hour, 16 minutes, it is confronted head on. And my optimism about networked control of information, it confronts a reality, which is Trump and Trump's manipulative, sort of media strategy, which is to fly every action into the face of truth and just say, it doesn't matter. What I said yesterday doesn't matter. Whether it's true or not, I'm saying something different today. It's the instant creation of what we call it now, post-truth. That is confronted in the play, and I'm pretty certain that's what many of the audiences took away from it as well. I was very close to the audience physically, and I could hear the points at which they gasped and recognised things, and that probably was the biggest thing that they reacted to.
Well, thanks so much. I'm really looking forward to watching it.
Thank you.